Okay, hello everyone. While the last people are joining, I will already start with a short introduction so we can start in time. So my name is Annelies van Dijk. I am the project manager of the SciComm Academy at SciMingo. For those of you who do not know us yet, we at SciMingo are a Flemish non-profit organization that believes in the power but also the importance of science communication. And especially with our SciComm Academy, we want to train and guide researchers a bit more in the different aspects of science communication. And for this, we organize on one hand hands-on workshops here in Brussels, in which can cover a broad range of topics, like, for example, optimize your social media use as a scientist, or how to pitch your research in a 3-minute video. And on the other hand, we also organize free monthly lunch talks like the one of today. And they can also go over different topics and they can be held in different formats. For example, we had lectures about how to write a book as a scientist, or how to think as a science journalist, but also more interactive panel discussions on, for example, citizen sciences. And for our talk of today, I am joined by Liesbeth Aerts and Matthias Meersschaert. And we will talk about how to communicate better about sensitive or loaded topics. So Liesbeth is co-founder of the Infopunt Proefdieronderzoek, or the Information Center for the Use of Animals in Research. And the aim of this organization is actually to give better information and correct information about how and why animals are actually used in biomedical research. She's also been an ambassador for EARA, which is the European Research Association for Animal Use, if I'm correctly. But besides that, she's also an all-round freelance science communicator, and she is co-organizer of the yearly BSciComm meeting here in Belgium. So if you're a science communicator here in Belgium, then I would highly suggest to join us in 2 weeks on the 1st of December. And I will put the link to the meeting in the chat and also in the follow-up mail. So I hope to see a lot of you there. Our second speaker is Matthias Meersschaert. Matthias is a professional communicator, and he has a lot of experience with communicating specifically about sensitive topics. In his previous role, he was advocating for the use of nuclear technology to solve climate change. And earlier this year, he joined the Belgian Climate Centre, where he now oversees all of the communication activities, and he manages different aspects of it there as well. If you don't know the Belgian Climate Centre either, I highly visit you to visit their new website, which just launched a few days ago. I will also link that one in the chat and in the follow-up mail. And the aim of this organization is to give a better overview of all of the climate sciences that is being executed here in Belgium, to make it more accessible, not only to stakeholders, but also to the broad audience. And I think I've talked already a long time for now. I just want to highlight that after the short presentation by both speakers, we want to have a more interactive discussion. So I highly suggest that you ask your questions in the Q&A window, which you should see at the bottom of your Zoom. And these questions should not only be related to the use of animals in research or climate change, but they can go about different topics, about your own research, or broader questions, because I believe that our two speakers are very knowledgeable about a broad range of topics, so we will be able to cover all of them. If they're interesting for the moment of the discussion, I will ask them at that time, and otherwise there's some time at the end of the talk to ask them as well. So with this, I will now give the floor first to Liesbeth, and I hope you all have a very interesting discussion with us.
First unmute, then share. Lose my buttons. Good day, good afternoon, good noon. Well, happy lunch to all of you. Thanks for joining. Thanks, Annelies, for inviting me and for the introduction. I'm super passionate about this topic, about navigating tough talks, because I think as science communicators, we shouldn't just talk about brilliant discoveries, but also about the process, and that involves sometimes a bit more complex or more controversial or nuanced topics as well. And so I'll speak today mostly about the lessons I learned myself from communicating about animal research, and also a little bit recent work relating to COVID-19, which also has controversial aspects, let's say. So I want to first tell you guys the story and goals of Infopunt Proefdieronderzoek, how it came about. It all started back in 2016. For those of you who were in Belgium at the time, they may remember that there was a big controversy in the media when Gaia, an animal rights organization, had published an undercover video from the animalarium at the university in Brussels. The university was a bit sort of taken by surprise, I think. The response was also a bit vague, and nobody else dared to speak up. So we saw a lot of outcry and opinions and things appearing in the media about animal research, some of it correct, some of it not correct. And we felt that nobody was sort of stepping up to speak on behalf of scientists as to why animal research is necessary, what is within the legal and ethical bounds of what researchers can do and what isn't, and what should be the appropriate sanctions, etc. So we decided to respond. One opinion article led to the next, and before we knew it, we sort of had a little collective of young researchers who wanted to at least sort of balance this debate a little bit. And so how it's going now, we have a website, and we want to be a little bit of a communication platform, providing more background information about animal research. So we have a website, we have social media channels. They're a bit quiet lately, but we want to sort of revive it again. It's complicated because we all started it as young and motivated postdocs, but yeah, I'm no longer a postdoc. People have moved abroad, etc. So it's a challenge to keep it going, but nonetheless, it's still active and out there. So we just sort of got together very organically. And now we actually founded a non-profit to sort of formalize it slightly. And what we've done over the years, like I mentioned, is communicate to the press, writing opinion articles, but also you see in one of the pictures below, Jeroen in the afspraak together with Michel van den Bos of the animal rights activist organization Gaia, and with policymakers. We had visits from people in parliament, in the animal facilities at university, etc. But apart from that, we also help other scientists to communicate about animal research. Oftentimes, people want to respond, or people have questions, or they get reactions, and they're unsure as to how to go about it. They've seen me or Jeroen or one of my other colleagues speak up about it before, and they contact us like, how should I respond? What should I do? How should I go about it? So that's really our dual role. And we've also, I'm pretty proud of that, actually helped push our own institutes and others to be more proactive and to communicate better about animal research. So together with EARA, that stands for the European Animal Research Association, Annelies, who are a European organization. Actually, I saw Bob is present here today, so if you have questions, Bob Tolliday is here, and you should definitely reach out. Together with them in Belgium, we've set up a transparency agreement. And so all of the Belgian universities and also a lot of the private partners, think of Janssen, GSK, have signed this document, which is about being, as the title says, transparent and communicating proactively about the role of animal research, or the role of animals in the research in this institute. So I want to just stress that our aim is to combat misinformation that exists, and maybe just a lack of knowledge on animal research, the numbers, the species, why, and so promote dissemination of the role that animals play, both advantages and limitations. So we are not, we don't exist to convince people to be pro-animal research. I mean, nobody is really pro-animal research. It's always a case of, as long as we can't do without, we still need it. But ideally, nobody, of course, would want to use animals if that was possible. And so we don't want to convince necessarily people of this opinion, let's say, but we want people to form an opinion based on the facts We don't want people to be against animal research because they think that researchers can do whatever and that there's no laws or what have you. So we want them to see the full picture. And if then, you know, with all the facts at hand, they still decide they don't want to support animal research, of course, we want to respect that opinion. So we want to just provide the information, I guess, and sort of separate facts from myths about animal research. Then very briefly, I've been working more recently with the people behind the COVID models in Belgium, where it's also sort of a controversial topic, but in a very different way, whereas animal research is very emotional. With COVID models, there's definitely also emotion involved, but there's a lot of complexity and uncertainty behind those models that people maybe don't grasp, or that definitely also the newspapers don't cover when they bring the numbers, which can lead to a lot of confusion. The outcome of such models is sometimes very counterintuitive. I mean, this is a graph demonstrating the paradox of Simpson that by now everybody is very familiar with. That's the fact that when there is a high degree of vaccination among the population, that actually indeed in the hospitals we will see more vaccinated people than non-vaccinated people, but that still doesn't mean that vaccination doesn't help. But also even just a simple concept of exponential growth. I mean, there's ample evidence that shows that just our human mind is not that good at grasping just how fast exponential growth goes. So that makes it complex to communicate if these trends and results can be counterintuitive. And lastly, of course, this had far-reaching consequences for each and every one of us in society. I don't have to tell you the lockdown measures, the people getting sick, people dying. This was science that was getting very close also to people's lived experience, right? So of course that creates opinion and also emotion. So I worked with biostatistician Niels Hens, which you may know, who was in the news quite regularly, he and his team behind the models of the spread of COVID in our country. And because he realized that a lot of these nuance as to how these models came about, what the limitations are, etc., there wasn't any room for that during the crisis. People just wanted to know, when's the peak? What are the numbers? What do we know? When will the next wave arrive? And also was very, very nuanced in his communication about it, because one thing is what the science says, and of course the next thing is what we do with it, right? So for all of these reasons, now we published a book to bring all this information that maybe wasn't possible in the press format during crisis or within crisis communication, but now for people who are more interested in the background exists. So that's also, one example of experience from which I sort of now distilled the lessons. And the first one is to team up. That's something we did with Infopunt Proefdieronderzoek. When you're navigating tough talks, when there's controversy, when you might get backlash, when it's sort of a, you get into debate programs and there might be sort of conflictuous opinion, it is always nice to not feel like you're the only one with this message, to sort of divide the load with like-minded individuals, with colleagues, with people at other organizations. It's not only helpful for you to just, keep it manageable and stay sane, because, as this little cartoon shows, it can be very exhausting to go against the flow. But I think also for your message, it is stronger. I mean, I never wanted to be Liesbeth Aerts, that person, the spokesperson for animal research. No, animal research is something that's, thousands of researchers in Belgium use animals. And so with the more voices are heard with the same message, I think also the stronger the message is. The second is to speak up. Again, with animal research, I noticed often, especially with more junior researchers, that they felt they didn't have the right expertise to talk about animal research because maybe they didn't know every detail of the law or of the practice, because, in your own research, you typically work on one topic or maybe with one species. And what if you get a question that you don't know the answer of? My professor or maybe somebody of the animal facilities is way better place to speak, so I will just shut up. But this usually ends then with everybody looking at each other and nobody speaking up. So I would say, as a scientist, you are an expert on your field. You don't have to have all the knowledge, and you just can be transparent about it and speak, to your experience, why you use animals in research, what measures you take, what regulations you have to abide by, etc., without therefore claiming to have all the knowledge of all the other situations, right? So in light of your audience or the public at large, you are in fact the expert. So do have a little confidence in yourself. And a third important lesson is that facts don't necessarily change minds. I mean, the knowledge deficit model in science communication has been sort of left behind already quite a few years ago. Facts are important, but they are not always enough. And sometimes also opposition or disbelief isn't based necessarily out of a lack of the facts, especially in animal research. There's a lot of sort of an emotional role, and it's an ethical dilemma that's involved. So it's really not as simple as just, putting the facts out there and thinking that the work is done or the conversation is done. What has to happen, which is a much more complicated answer. I think, navigating tough talks, it says talks there, so it's a dialogue, it's a two-way street. As a researcher, we shouldn't think that we know better necessarily than the audience, or that our opinion in a way is more valuable. Again, evidence matters and fact matters, but I think in order for your communication to be effective, it's very important to understand what this person who doesn't agree with you or who maybe spreads misinformation or where they're coming from, why they think this way, etc. I think you have to also listen to be able to have a meaningful and productive conversation. I think also, secondly, it's important to be proactive. With animal research, we realize that in the end, if we only respond every time something appears in the media that has an error in it or a sort of misrepresentation of animal research, that's not a very strong communication strategy. What you want to do is, even in the absence of potential backlash, is that you have a message, is that you provide information, that you have a platform where people who have a question can find information. So it's really about having your own strategy and communicating proactively rather than reactively. And you have to realize that building trust and becoming a trustful authority on a subject takes some time, and it's a long-term effort. I don't think the job of animal research or of a European Animal Research Association will ever be done. There are challenges, acute challenges now. There is the long-term trust of the public. The field also evolves. So I think you have to sort of be in it for the long term to win it. And then lastly here, I think it's also very important to be aware of your own bias and your positionality when you speak in the media, on your blog, even on Twitter, on social media. If you work for an institution, if you hold a PhD or you don't hold a PhD, this all impacts how people view your opinion. And also, I personally, I'm interested to hear maybe what Matthias or people in the audience think about this, but I don't think that anyone is really 100% objective. I mean, often people say, yeah, but science is objective, and it's true, the facts are objective, but all of us participating in this conversation are human beings. And we can try to stick to the facts as much as we can, but we always are slightly biased as well. So I think you should be aware of that too, and not be blind to it. And then more practically on misinformation and backlash, I just have 2 slides. Because that's sort of a question that comes back often when I speak about this topic, is how to deal online with misinformation. I think there was a previous lecture also on social media, which has a lot of helpful tips in general about the conversation about science on these new media, which have a very different dynamic and where anyone can weigh in and are very fast and anonymous also. So I think when you want to deal with online misinformation, you can sort of balance the record by providing correct information, but doing it in a way that shows that you listen to the person, that you actually respond to their concerns, and not just sort of a bland sort of answer copy-pasted from just a generalized statement, and that these people feel heard. But keep in mind that you're not necessarily there also to convince the original poster. I think, especially with the propagation of online misinformation, it is important for everybody who is reading along that they see also the other side of an argument. In this case, hopefully the evidence-based one. For the people who are on Twitter, X, you see now regularly with these controversial tweets, this little box, readers highlighted, you may want to know, right? Then it's not a case of deleting the original tweet, but based on feedback from users, Twitter/X provides sort of context that may help people who are scrolling through their feed to interpret what they see, right? So I think also that should be your role in the way of putting information out there to balance it. Because if you don't respond, of course, the only thing that will be out there is the misinformation. Nevertheless, I mean, there can be real trolls or really unproductive conversations, and sometimes it's perfectly okay or even most effective to just not respond, right? And if it's really difficult for you to handle, I think it's useful to develop a policy so that not with every angry tweet or every difficult reaction or everything that pops up in an article that you have to think of, first get angry, then then calm down, realize what to do or not, but sort of develop a policy like in this cases we will respond, or in this cases we will not respond. I think that helps make things go smoother instead of always going through this emotional roller coaster of what to do and not, and always lose a lot of time. It can be handy, especially on social media, to diffuse and not always go exactly into conflict modes. If you want a good example of that, it's unrelated to science. I always tell people to check out the feed of James Blunt, the British singer, who has a lot of people who also don't like his music. For some reason, they put rather hateful tweets out, but he's very, he always gives very funny responses. And I think that's a very effective way to sort of shut down the trolls. I don't know if it's always translatable to our context in science, but it's a nice illustration, I think. And you can always block or ban people, of course, as well. That can be part of a policy of which reactions you respond to and where you don't want to waste any more efforts or time. So to wrap it up, I think navigating tough talks isn't easy. It does take up some time and energy, but I hope with the tips I provided in teaming up and gaining confidence and some pointers here that it can be maybe a little bit easier for you. And I think my main sort of take-home message want to be is that nevertheless, despite these challenges, I think it's important to keep the conversation going and to not be silenced, because I mean, if you're not part of the conversation, the other party has already won, to put it in battle language. And I think if your science is worth doing, it's worth also communicating about it and defending and standing up for how and why you do it. So that's it for now. And if there are any questions, I think we can go also much deeper into it during the discussion and with the added insights that I'm myself very much looking forward to from Matthias and the climate change story. Thank you.
Thank you, Liesbeth. We will now continue with the talk of Matthias. Let me share.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Annelies, for the invitation. Thank you, Liesbeth, for your insightful presentation. Some interesting similarities, also some interesting differences, I think, which might be really interesting for the audience to tap into later on during the Q&A. So my name is Matthias. I joined the Climate Centre 3 months ago, and I'm responsible for communication within the Climate Centre. Thank you, SciMingo, for organizing this lunch talk. And during the next 15 minutes, I will first briefly give some context and information on the Belgian Climate Centre, since we are quite new in the field. And then also elaborate on the topic of the day, which, why and in what way climate change communication is a sensitive topic sometimes. And then thirdly, how to address this. Some suggestions and solutions that are hopefully also applicable in other sectors. First word about myself to start with, and I start with a picture. In the next slide, you'll see a picture of me about 10 years ago. I love to ski. I love the mountains, and 10 years ago was the first time I think I experienced sort of the effects of climate change and a warming planet, although I wasn't fully aware of it. But my favorite valley in the Alps was not covered in snow as usual. I used to go there since a very long time, since childhood, but it was completely green in the middle of February, and it was mostly bizarre, a bit scary, but most of all bizarre, because I had been going there since my childhood, and yeah, I could even be outside in a t-shirt at 5 p.m. But then the year after, the valley was back under snow, and everything seemed just fine, just as it always had been. And then, around the same time, that's another picture which I'm sharing with you, I also started working for a technology federation that defends nuclear technology for all peaceful applications, including energy, and also focusing on the potential of nuclear energy as a low carbon energy source, and as such, as one of the possible solutions to tackle climate change and avoid emissions. And the picture here that you see with my colleagues was taken in December 2015 during the COP21 summit in Paris. And for the first time ever, our industry was invited. And it really felt like a bit of a historic moment. For the first time, the nuclear industry was invited to a COP summit. By the way, I should also say that there's no link whatsoever between my current role at the Belgian Climate Centre and nuclear technology. I'm just mentioning this because of the topic of the day, of course, which is about communicating about sensitive topics. Well, nuclear, that's definitely one. So I'm also happy to take any questions during the Q&A session on this, should you have any. But then let's briefly talk about my organization. Another picture during the inauguration in November 2022, just to say that the Belgian Climate Centre was created just under a year ago by the Secretary of State, Thomas Dermin. And beside him, in this picture, you also see our scientific director, Valérie Drouet, who is a dendrochronologist, and our operational director, Alain Yamsen. And the office building in the background is where we sit, is on the side of the Royal Meteorological Institute in Uccle. And when Valérie and Ella started to work in January this year, it was just the two of them. And then they started, of course, recruiting and creating the team. And now we are 9 people. And by the way, we are currently looking for a senior data scientist. Applications are open until the beginning of December. I'm just using this talk to make a little bit of promotion for our vacancy. Now, before I dive into the topic of the day, just one final extra slide on the Climate Centre, because we often get questions on who we are and mostly why there's another expert center on the climate where there is already so much happening on that topic. So to wrap it up, basically, we have 3 objectives, which are displayed here. First, on the left, we want to create a better overview of the climate research that is currently being done in Belgium, both at the level of the federal scientific institutions, but also within universities and other research institutes. And well, a lot of relevant research is being done here in Belgium, but the domain is very vast, it's very diverse, it's also scattered and quite fragmented. And also, since climate-related issues becoming more relevant and visible, the domain itself, the scientific domain, is also growing, and more climate-related research is being done, also in domains, for instance, which at first don't seem very related to climate science, like economics, for instance, or psychology. And basically what we want to do with the Climate Centre is to do a mapping and have a better overview of the Belgian climate research domains. We also want to induce an interdisciplinary approach and more collaborations, and in general, strengthen the scientific research capacity. Then in second place, the green arrow here is, well, we want to ensure that the broad field of societal actors take into account the insights and knowledge that results that spring from climate research. So in other words, we try to improve the transfer of knowledge from climate science on the one hand to the political and economic decision makers on the second hand, plus the media, and also to a lesser extent the general public. And then thirdly, objective number 3, we want to create a return from society to science and make sure that the current and also future climate research is truly meeting societal needs. And in other words, we want future climate research to be fully aligned with climate needs. So that's it as an introduction. Now I'll dig into the topic of the day. And when I was first invited for this talk, I was a bit, well, surprised, because when I joined this job, I never really considered climate to be a sensitive topic, but it truly is actually. So let's dig into it. On the next slide, or maybe already, no, the next slide even. It all starts with this, and basically it's pretty simple, or at least it should be, because the basics about climate science and climate change can actually be summarized in not more than 10 words. It's real, it's us, it's human activity, the experts agree, it's bad, we will have bad consequences if we continue that like this, but also there is hope. So that is, in a nutshell, the simple message. But unfortunately, it comes with some challenges. And so on the next slide, I'll give an overview of some of the challenges, because, well, if the basics are so simple, like I explained on the previous slides, and they should be undisputed, then what makes climate change such a sensitive topic? So this is an overview of the things I see in the first place, and in the rest of my presentation, I'll address each one of them separately in the following slides. And if possible, for each of them, I'll provide also some hints and suggestions how to deal with it. So, challenge number 1 on this slide. Well, science, to start with, it's nuanced. It's sometimes complex, and some people are not buying it because they don't understand complex data sets, or they seem to be overwhelmed by it. And also the increasing short attention span triggered by social media use, for instance, and typical for millennials and digital natives, probably doesn't help either. And why do I mention this? I think that most of you here attending today are scientists, and that you're all familiar with graphs and statistics. But for many subsets of society, even at the level of decision makers, information should be easily accessible, easy to understand. So make it simple, or even super simple. Even the graph on this slide can be overwhelming or considered too difficult. And on the next slide, I give an overview, just an example of how you can tackle this. And you're all familiar with this, of course. It's called infographics, because it's appealing, sometimes difficult, to visualize complex data sets, but when it's done successfully, it's really super effective. These examples, they go really, really far, actually, in simplification and visualization. But I think they're very successful examples of making a complex information visually appealing. Also to mention, it's extremely useful in the context of digital media, scrollable infotainment, and the short attention span that I mentioned. And probably one of the best examples in class is the warming, and very successful in my sector, is the warming stripes on the next slides, developed by Ed Hawkins, which now exists in a full set of variants. Pictured here, for instance, is the ocean acidification stripes. Besides that, besides infographics, I think it's also helpful to use commonplace frames like simple, clear messages, repeated often, that overcome sometimes the language barrier of climate science, and audiences react more to concepts that they understand. And another way to making it accessible is finding creative ways to talk about the issue, or bring a new spin, or take a new angle. Storytelling, for instance, to make it understandable and engaging, just like I tried in my first slide when talking about my favorite valley in the Alps. Or you could even try humor in some instances, but still treat the issue seriously. That's my recommendation. So the learning for the first challenge is just avoid relying on cold jargon and numbers. So here's the second challenge, which I think is one of the most important and overarching difficulties in climate change communication. And it's linked to the notion of uncertainty, because it is difficult because for the public, uncertainty is a significant barrier to engaging with simple climate, with climate change. Secondly, for policymakers, the focus on uncertainty can obscure the important messages underneath. And also, too often, climate science themselves, they find themselves apologizing for what they don't know, and rather than to confidently communicate what they do know. So that's a problem. And I've given an example on the next slide of this uncertainty related to climate change communication, and that's time distance, of course, because people are less concerned about what is distance in the future. And you also see that, well, the gap, the chart is widening. That's the factor of uncertainty that comes with time distance. And to deal with this challenge, I don't really have a one solution that fits all. But what could help is this: first, try to make it personal and make it concrete. Secondly, I think you should try to make it about people. Climate change is about people. It's not about the planet. Forget the distant ice sheets, focus on what matters to people, their homes, their families, their livelihoods, their communities, their favorite forests, their beaches, or their animals. So my recommendation here is to bring the distance long-term abstract to the here, now, and concrete. And then maybe a third suggestion is to show people how they and their families are experiencing climate impacts already today. So that brings me to the third challenge I encounter, and that's dealing with false information or dealing with climate change denial. And actually, I had not expected it to already see it in my 3-month period with the Climate Centre. But pictured here is an outtake, an op-ed opinion piece in the Standard a few weeks ago. I think most of you here attending speak Flemish, but basically, well, you can read somebody who's questioning climate change, stating that in the past, maybe the climate was already equally warm as, or even warmer as it is today. And my answer to this on the next slide is really this: bring the facts and the figures. In this case, reply to it with firm, undisputed data. In the case of a TV studio interview where you're, for instance, invited with, as a climate scientist, with a climate change denier or a climate change skeptic, I would refuse the invitation. I'm happy to elaborate it in the Q&A, should there be any questions. But always refer to the facts and figures, to data, to science, ideally from international, trustworthy, and undisputed sources. This, by the way, also proved very useful in my previous job, because in the end, you can have an opinion about climate change, but not about the science and the underlying data. You cannot disagree with facts. And that brings me, I'm conscious of timings, to my last challenge that I want to talk about with you today. And that's the issue of dealing with climate and eco-anxiety. The last but not the least. You may be familiar with this photo. It's from a few years ago, Associated Press, wildfires in Australia in 2013. But what it does with people is that it triggers fear, or it can make people desperate, or even turn a blind eye to climate change, or trigger indifference even for those who think that it's already too late and that the world that we know is doomed to disappear. What it also does, on the flip side, this kind of pictures makes the headlines. It gets a lot of media attention. It creates clickbait or viewers for TV, news shows, etc. So it's partly good because it gets climate change on the agenda, but most of all, it's very, very bad because it sends out the wrong messages. And so to wrap up, I just want to have two further slides for you with recommendations how to tackle this. This is the first one, and really everything you need to know, or what I want to suggest, is really on the slide. So people are more likely to take actions if they believe that the actions make a positive difference. For me, to build efficacy in climate change communication, I would point people towards high impact climate actions that they can take as an individual together with their communities. And then, try to tailor it. It doesn't make sense to somebody who loves to organize barbecues to try convince him to become vegan. There's other ways in doing it, but look at your audience and then try to make it doable. And then one very last slides about recommendations, and that's my overall message: bring hope, because we know what the problem is. So we also know how to solve this, and it is science that is telling us what to expect and what we should prepare for, but also it's science that's bringing new technologies, new insights. Science itself is bringing the solutions. And so we both know how to deal with the issue, but also to avoid the worst. So, and the last thing, every contribution counts. So on that, I would like to wrap up. I have one more slide to make some promotion for my organization with a QR code that you're happy to if you're happy to. After all, I'm in charge of communication, so feel free to click through and start following us on social media. But I'll now give back the floor to Annelies and to Liesbeth and to myself to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you also, Matthias, for this very nice presentations. There are some questions already in the Q&A. I will just read the first one, and I hope we can have a lot more coming up. So please feel free to ask your questions. So someone asked, I think that there are people that 100% disagree with the data. I doubt that the person publicly denying climate change has not seen the temperature data. Is then something that we should not just engage with us all?
Can I, Liesbeth, are you happy for me to have a go with it? Yeah. My recommendation is choose your battles. Actually, if you divide the general public or just the population, you'd also find 10% strong believers, advocates. You'll also find 10% of people, I'm generalizing of course, that will disagree with your message, completely disagree, and are happy to take action to make their point. And then there's the 80% in between who don't necessarily have an opinion, but who are happy to take information and judge advantages and disadvantages and make an informed opinion that Liesbeth referred to, that is so important. So somehow my idea is, well, choose your battles if you want to engage in communication. The 10% that is, well, a lost case between brackets, I wouldn't focus on them too much. The example that was given here is different, of course, because this person is using public platforms that are consulted by a large subset of the population as a trustworthy source. So then it was important for us really to react, because it would feel bizarre if the scientific worlds and climate scientists wouldn't stand up, and so that's what they did actually. we joined forces, and some scientists reacted that same day and had a similar op-ed published the next day. Also in collaboration, of course, with the person, the journalist at the Standard responsible for the op-ed page, we immediately got in touch and sort of well, responsibilized him in the sense that well, climate change is not something open to opinions. It's a fact, actually. So that was our take on it. I just mentioned before that for a TV panel discussion, we would not accept the invitation. And that's because of the framing. Actually, it's inviting a climate scientist and a climate change denier for a public TV debate. It may give nice television because the sparks would come off of the polarization, but it's deontologically wrong of the journalists because there's no discussion. There should not be a debate about climate science because it's facts. It is happening. And I think that's like the difference with Liesbeth's industry, where you can have an informed opinion pro or against animal testing, but so yeah, but that's my take on it. Liesbeth, I don't know if you want to say something about it from your point of view.
No, I agree with it. I think indeed, as I tried to say also during my talk, and as you also said now, Matthias, it's not the game of convincing every last soul on this planet about a certain position. It's about providing the research information and the evidence base, and to fuel the societal discussion with information to have a fruitful discussion. Because I think in that sense, you can indeed not debate climate science, but you can debate the policies that should follow it, and what targets we should set by when, and what's maybe realistic, etc. But it should indeed start from the facts, that there's no fruitful discussion other than indeed maybe lots of hits and clicks for your TV show or little blurbs that do well on social media. So I think to the person who asked the question, yes, I mean, there will always be people who will 100% disagree. Even, I mean, we're talking now about controversial topics, but take any topic and you will find a club of people who, I mean, people prepping for doomsday, etc. was just now in the news, and then there are always fringe movements. But I think indeed, like Matthias says, you have to choose your battles, and also you don't want to fuel maybe what is maybe like a very small but vocal minority by giving them attention. So nuanced answer. Yeah.
There was another question, if you could maybe, I think both of you, give an interest or a successful example when you were dealing with a sensitive or a challenging situation.
Yeah, I saw that question. I was thinking about it. I have two specific examples in mind. So one was at the very beginning of us getting involved in media about animal research, just after this Gaia undercover video. There was at one point something written, I think it was in Knack, by a policymaker, member of parliament for the party Groen, who proposed to introduce a tax on animal experiments. And I mean, we as scientists thought it was ridiculous because actually, our research with animals is funded by the government, right? So either then say you can say we will no longer fund animal research, but that they didn't want to say. They want to say you have to do all this research, and then we will say what methods are good or not, even though they don't know, right? We were very upset. We wrote this, we also wrote the opinion, I think it was on the Standard, they responded, but then also we both realized, and also the newspapers were like, yeah, I mean, this can't go on forever. And this is not a fruitful discussion to react to each other via the media. So we got in touch with this parliamentarian and his, he didn't have a cabinet, but yeah, the members of the, not the politicians themselves, but the ones of the study, I don't know how it's called in English, the studiedienst. And they came over for a visit to, at the time, the animal facilities of KU Leuven. We had a session, they could present, we presented, and that was a very fruitful discussion. Of course, this proposition never came, but they wanted to understand how they could, they still wanted obviously to reduce the number of animal experiments, which is a goal, of course, but then how to do it. So it was actually a very fruitful conversation once we stepped away from the, I'm right discussion in the media and get sort of down to business. Because I think a lot of, as in every situation, a lot of conflict is born out of miscommunication and ignorance of the full picture. And another small example, I just want to highlight it because of the human element, is at one point I got this email from somebody who was actually also in local politics, but that's irrelevant at this point, who wrote to me and how it's so horrible and blah, 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 and how can I condone this and these poor animals, and and there should really be a label in the pharmacy to make clear to consumers what has been developed thanks to animal research and what hasn't. And then I researched this person a bit because this person was in local politics. There was a website with bio information, and I found that this person loved reading books. And so I was like, okay, 3 steps back and email like, look, let's start this conversation over. I also really like reading books. I just finished this book on, I really liked it, blah, blah, blah. And so, and just by adding this small thing about our common interest in reading books, we approach each other a bit less from the sort of enemy perspective. And I told her, yeah, there is already a label. It's the pharmacy. Everything we have is indirectly, virtually everything based on animal research, etc. And so it became a much more nuanced discussion. And then, as always, you often discover that you have a lot more in common than what you disagree on. So it's always worth taking that human perspective. And I was thinking also on putting names on it, and then I'll shut up and leave it up to Matthias. What we try to do with Infopunt Proefdieronderzoek, we put the facts and the figures there. This amount of animals this year, last year, this is a trend. It's mostly mice and rats, but also these animals. These are the 3 R's, and all this info. But what we also want to bring is stories from young researchers, somebody, like Annelies, who would say, actually, I'm doing a PhD on A, I'm using zebrafish, killifish, I think, or yeah. And that's why we use this model, and it's useful because of this, that, and I'm doing actually this research because, I don't know, I'm just no longer Annelies, I'm just going rather because actually my grandmother died of Alzheimer's disease. I'm really motivated to look for something. So bringing this human narrative also a little bit, it's always a bit tricky. We find ourselves as scientists, we want to bring the facts, the evidence, it's not emotion, but it is emotion, like I said, also for us. And I don't think it does a disservice to the facts if you share why you think it's important. Like Matthias started this talk by seeing that the ski slopes where he went for years and as a kid that there was no snow, right? These are things that motivate you, and that can also sometimes help.
Matthias, maybe, do you have an example?
I could add just quickly something, but I won't go in as much detail as Liesbeth, because I think the question has been greatly dealt with. But probably, my previous job in somehow defending nuclear, despite controversy and despite a popular lack of support, I still consider it. I won't claim it fully, of course, because it was triggered by many factors. But I joined the nuclear industry shortly after the Fukushima incident, and there was really no societal support for the technology. But I think, and it was one of the slides I mentioned, we kept coming out with facts and figures. Which were sometimes a bit difficult to communicate about because they're so opposed to this popular belief. There's such a wide gap between what the figures say on the one hand and what the public opinion says. But then, of course, especially in the potential role that nuclear can play in tackling climate change as one of the low carbon electricity sources. But then over time, also with climate change getting higher on the radar, I think people started to buy it, and decision makers as well. But yeah, just an example. I couldn't really think of something more.
No, but the next question actually links nicely to that, because someone asked that the science argument for climate change has been largely won, but the real communication challenge is now how to actually convince politicians to take actions in time or in the right time scale.
That is, of course, the million-dollar question. But I wish I could answer it right now and here. And that's also the raison d'être for the Climate Centre. Actually, that's the reason why we were created, to really make a change. Because there's this overwhelming evidence on the one hand, which seems to, according to, there's a large scientific agreement on what the problem is and what needs to be done. And then indeed everybody asks, why is there so much conversation and so little action? And I think to answer this question specifically, why it is difficult for politicians to get action, it's, from the top of my head, I'm not a political scientist or whatsoever, but I think there's three elements that play. And one taps into the problem of the time horizon that I mentioned, because doing politics and policy is very often focused on the short term. I also saw that in my previous industry, where to ensure energy and electricity supply, it's a long distance challenge that you take over decades. And the same goes with dealing with climate change. Actually, the efforts that we make today will only have or start to see a positive impact in a few years or a few decades to come. Whereas doing politics and being a politician, I think, is more focused on the short term. Whereas, of course, it should be also looking at the long term. And a second thing that plays, according to me, is also related to the sort of negative framing about tackling climate change, mitigation and adaptation. Many people feel that if we want to solve this global crisis, that we will have to give up a lot of privileges that we already have now. And I think that it's also playing in the heads of politicians, that tackling climate change is perceived as taking negative measures. And but that's my personal point of view. But I think it could be different, because mitigating the effects of climate change has a lot of positive things that come with it, like clean air in cities. Who is opposed to inhaling cleaner air? So I think there's a lot of positive takes that also politicians could relate to when dealing with climate change and taking measures accordingly. And then the last element, I think, that is of relevance is, well, the power of the many. That is the reason why people march the streets in climate marches, like we will hopefully probably see on the 3rd of December. I think politicians listen to the general public if they have a feeling that it represents a majority, because politicians, of course, need to be voted by the general public. So if you can make politicians understand that tackling climate change and willing to take measures is a conviction, is something that a large subset or a majority of the population is interested to do and willing to do, then I think politics will follow. And similarly, I didn't mention it, but it's also an interesting insight from the desktop research I did about successful climate change communication, is that when people feel that they're not among the only ones or the few ones to take measures, but that there's this big movement that a large subset of the population is doing something, people have this sort of herd mentality that they want to also engage in something that many people are already doing. So that's just a side note to the question, I think. I don't know if Liesbeth wants to say something, because the question was specifically about climate change, of course.
Yeah, but with the COVID models, I had recently a big discussion about this, what happened in Belgium during the second wave. So we had the first wave lockdown. Everybody was like, oh, let's save the summer, blah, 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 bubbles. And then in the autumn, the second wave came, and scientists saw this coming. I mean, they already knew in spring that it was coming. They saw numbers go up in September. For those of you who still remember, we were then in a sort of political disaster, or sort of the perfect storm, in the sense that all politicians were busy forming a new government. We had this government of running affairs before. And even there, you had the same two first elements that you mentioned, the timeline, even though the timeline was super short if you compare it to climate change, but like, oh yeah, going slightly up, but we'll see, and let's wait it out, and is it really that bad, and you know, push the decision to the next day or the next week, and we'll get together, you know, we'll see, we'll keep an eye on it, we'll keep a close watch, because everybody knew that indeed they didn't want to take negative measures. Also the population was like, oh, not again. So nobody wanted to sort of take the decision, but by postponing taking the decision, it was much worse than it should have been. And the second wave was really, I mean, the scientists agree, was much higher than it could have been. And so that made me actually very sort of pessimistic now about climate change, because I thought if I mean, just thousands of people that died, we're in a crisis. And even then, it is very difficult to sort of take this preventative action and create this, create a positivity around taking these measures. So yeah, that's something that indeed for climate change, I think, is a huge hurdle, this indirectness. Yeah.
I also have actually maybe a personal question, because Matthias, you've been talking about the importance of visualization of figures and facts, of course, but Liesbeth, I think in the field of animal research, figures, images is a bit more difficult, or what is your opinion on this?
Yeah, no, I really love those stripes, and I wanted to ask actually more about it, like how they came about, or was it just a creativity, or really with a mission? But I think in animal research, what I think is very valuable in terms of the transparency is to really show people. I mean, it's less creativity maybe, but if you talk to, you know, if you just stop 10 people on the street and ask them what they think or how they would draw animal research, or if you just go to any Shutterstock database, animal research pictures, like good ones or realistic ones are very hard to find. People think that, you know, scientists just stuff 10 cigarettes into the mouth of a rabbit or inject it with a library of 1,000 toxic compounds. So the role of basic research on how these things happen, I mean, it's really a black box for a lot of the people, also politicians. And that's normal. That's actually normal. If you never set foot in a lab, how are you supposed to know? I think animal research, in that sense, is sort of a historic problem, in that for a long time, it was always like, let's not talk about animals too much because, you know, it's sensitive. Let's just hush, we know what we're doing, the public leaves us alone. But that's sort of, we're still paying the price for that, I think, this lack of transparency. But this is now changing. I mentioned the transparency agreements in Belgium, but it's in many European countries, there are similar agreements and concordats and whatever. Largely also thanks to the work of organizations like EARE to create this proactive openness that I mentioned. And there are several institutes who have even like a virtual lab tour of their animal research space, which I think helps a lot. The sort of simple infographic type thing is less of an issue, but I think that's more because of the different type of controversial topic, in that indeed with animal research it's more ethical and not necessarily, I mean, it's a lack of understanding around the practice, but it's not, you know, it's not the complexity per se of the matter or the nuance or the uncertainty, etc. But still, I think the visual things work, and making it accessible are still important. Yeah.
Okay, I see another question. I often hear that the argument about climate change, or I often hear the argument, what can we as a small country do to tackle climate change? It's no use. How would you tackle this? I think it comes back to the argument like every small bit helps, or maybe as Liesbeth said, unite forces. But what is your guys' opinion on this?
Well, yes, every contribution counts indeed. And of course, it's a bit difficult because climate change is a global challenge. It doesn't stop at borders, of course, but still countries need to implement their strategy. So what is that, the way it's been done now, I'm getting a little bit technical here, is like, well, Europe has really implemented specific targets actually, which countries should adhere to, but then it's up to countries themselves to implement them and see how they will reach that target. But yeah, it is like Annelies said, every contribution counts, and every country needs to do an effort proportionally. We're getting a bit into climate policy, which I'm not necessarily an expert in. So I would like to, this gets more philosophical, of course, and of course it triggers so many questions, because this is one of the biggest, if not the biggest challenge that mankind is facing in the 21st century. So I don't have a clear answer to it, but anyway, on policy level, so there is this EU target and there's this follow-up. There's this year there will be the focus on the COP, the climate summit in December, will be on the stock take to see how well it's a follow-up for the first time after 5 years, how much the world has progressed collectively towards reaching that net zero target in 2050. Sorry, and then similarly, a European event has taken place a few weeks ago to do the similar exercise, but then specifically for Europe, how big is the gap in Europe between the global targets and then European contribution. But then more specifically on country level, I would have to dig into that first. So I'd rather not go into it much further, because I don't have the insights and the information.
Yeah, I think just to add to it on the philosophical side, because indeed climate change doesn't stop at the border, and the same goes for viral transmissions in the case of COVID. And I think also, I mean, I've experienced this whole pandemic, you know, looking at it from the perspective of a science communicator. It was very interesting for me to see how I think I myself, and maybe many of us, underestimate the importance of this, the feeling that indeed we are part of a societal collective, right? And we've become so individualized and making our own choices, and yeah, society has become more individualized. And then there's a pandemic, and you realize, you know, actually we're all helping each other here, right? We're staying home to save other people. We're getting vaccinated, not necessarily to protect ourselves, but the elderly and vulnerable in society. And I think also, again, to a certain extent, as with climate change, I mean, we need to, I guess, regress a little bit from this whole individualization. I think it's the case for a lot of sort of bigger societal challenges that await us, is this collective, the collective goals. But I'm hopeful there, because I think the younger generations have a very different mindset in that, or like there's sort of a little cultural shift. I don't know, I'm not a psychologist or human behavior specialist either, but I think this also, even in communication, approaching people as you know, part of a whole, and not necessarily, you know, what can I do? This is important, but also how does what I do affect others in a way. I think, yeah, we all need to sort of take a step back in that culture, I think.
Yeah, I see a new question popping up. How often do you focus on the small wins in a short time frame, or are you both more focusing on bigger goals in the far future to maybe change the system?
The first one, of course, the challenge is so big, and I also experienced that in my own work agenda or calendar. It can come across as something overwhelming if the challenge is so big and so distant in the future. So what I do for myself, and also in this, I think tackling climate change is such a huge and compelling and complex and multi-set issue that it's necessary to break it down into all these different domains and the small wins. Also, from a motivational point of view, the small wins in the short term are so important to keep you going and get to this bigger goal in the longer distance. That's my shortest possible answer. I'll keep it to this, actually also conscious of timings. Liesbeth, over
Yeah, I
to
just
you.
wanted to link it also maybe to Thomas Vivijs' question about the fragmentation in the communication, because I do think, if I can speak to my experience in animal research, I have been sort of myself sometimes frustrated that then, you know, it boils down to the hobby project, you know, after hours time of a few young researchers to set this up and how to make it structural, right? I mean, it's great to have the small wins, to have these conversations with policymakers where, you know, like the example I gave earlier, where we really made a difference. You know, the transparency agreement we set up together with EARA, really, I mean, there's very clear wins. But in the end, also, you need to think, okay, what is the structural way to tackle this? And I think actually that's something I wanted to dive into and maybe also hear the audience opinion. The example of the Belgian Climate Centre is really a very, very nice initiative because it's, I mean, it's a solid, it's not like a hobby project or, you know, climate scientist A speaking up and climate scientist B speaking up, but it's really this bundling of expertise, not only to improve the research, but also I think in terms of communication, to sort of combat this fragmentation. So that's what I see more. I mean, it's not a big win in terms of, you know, climate change has been halted or we have saved the planet, but I do think sort of this the ad hoc and structural approach need to be both, at least, you know, the small wins need to build towards something that you feel is structural. Otherwise, you're just sort of you know, moping with the water flowing. Moping, is that an expression in English? Dweilen met de kraan open. Which I think is a challenge, and which I think, you know, in general, in case of these complex topics, I mean, now the Belgian Climate Centre then exists in terms of climate change, and I understand there has been support also by the government, which is great. But if you think of animal research, so it's really a hobby project of a few people against, you know, animal rights activist organization, which have a turnover of like €1 million a year, have professional campaigns, etc. And not, I mean, you see this also in the GMO debate with vaccines, with the epidemiology. And so as a science communicator, I don't have an answer, but I think that's a very, very important discussion in how, like, the field as scientists, I mean, in a way we're all independent, but how we can organize ourselves indeed to sort of battle this fragmentation of communication, because I mean, I'm sure there are scientists in the audience, probably most of you are. You all know, I mean, you are already overworked just by doing the science, doing this complicated, I mean, communicating is a lot of work, and communicating on controversial topics is even more time and energy consuming. So yeah, that's a real challenge that I don't have the answer to myself. So I see that sort of as a relation to the question where we started from.
Yeah, and do you think that there can be an important role for the interdisciplinary approach that is being used now in the Belgian Climate Centre, or even transdisciplinary approaches? Because I think for now of course, because as you say, it's a hobby more approach for the animal research. Do you think that there could also be an added value of incorporating other research, or whatever? Of course. For
totally.
For the Climate Centre, it's happening already, no? Different disciplines are being integrated.
Totally. I'll try to combine also and tap into Thomas Vivijs' question. Thomas is a former colleague of mine from a long time ago. We haven't seen each other since a very long time. So Thomas, if you're still here, thanks for your question, and nice to see you virtually even. But the fragmentation is a reality indeed. There's a lot of communication happening. It goes in diverse directions, and I think it's also normal because the domain is so vast, and actually more and more parts of society and of the scientific world are including climate change and dealing with the issues related to climate change within their research. So I think the domain is even growing further, as I mentioned briefly during the slides. However, as you rightly mentioned, I think there should be more coordination indeed, and that there should be some sort of one voice or one clear message. And I'm not pretending that the Belgian Climate Centre is the right entity or organization to do that. Of course, it's nice to see that we are there to coordinate all these different voices and all this different research that is happening. But it always links back to the first slide I gave about the 10 words, summing up climate change and the issue in 10 words. It's real, it's us, it's experts agree, it's a problem, but there's hope. I think if all the different voices with all their nuances could somehow relate back to those 5 messages, those 10 words, I think that's already a big win indeed. And then with regards to this question, from the Belgian Climate Centre perspective, I think what we would like to see if that there's that within the probably next government there will be a broad consensus that climate change is the biggest issue that needs to be tackled, and that it's implemented in the different policy domains, etc. And then to answer Annelies' question about interdisciplinarity, yes, indeed, to cope with this scattered domain or to counterbalance it, we will stimulate a more interdisciplinary approach, because, well, it will gain more insights and more scientific insights will come forth from it. But indeed, to sort of counter the scattered domain that it is becoming now, we want to stimulate from within the Belgian Climate Centre a more interdisciplinary approach, and that's why we will, for the first time ever, bring together all the climate scientists in Belgium during a 2-day conference in February. So we hope that we can plant the seed for that more interdisciplinary approach and for more collaborations in the fields.
Yeah, I think in that sense, what we try to do, so I think the transparency agreements in that sense was a big win, and I mean, really thanks to Yara, set up relatively swiftly, because in that way, of course, if we can agree that that all the large players who are involved in animal research take proactive action themselves, of course, I mean, the effect multiplies, right? The same with our goal to help scientists or empower scientists or give them the skills or the confidence to talk about animal research, because then again, I mean, that's sort of a ripple effect. And so in a way, we're doing that, right? But that's not really helping us in terms of the getting from the hobby project to professional organization. I think their budget is really just, I mean, sort of the limiting factor, I guess. And sort of as to a single big win in relation to the question that's open, I think sort of the concrete potential big win that's sort of on the radar now or on the horizon is that the legislation surrounding animal research is being revised, and I think there not only Infopunt Proefdieronderzoek but also international organizations and you know, scientists as a whole, I think that will be an important sort of a milestone to get this evaluation of the legislation not being sort of hijacked by animal rights activists, but really taking into account the reality on the floor in the labs, let's say. That would be a major goal and potentially a big win. We'll see.
I have maybe another question, because I came back to something you said in the beginning, Liesbeth, about scientists trying to be as objective as possible. But what is your opinion on scientists having to be neutral? Because I know that in the past, for example, with climate change, scientists knew what was going to happen for a long time, but they believed that they had to keep a neutral opinion. But still, the facts spoke for what they were, and then they should maybe...
Yeah, so to be clear, I don't believe scientists are 100% neutral, but also I don't think they should always be 100% neutral. I think what the responsibility of each and every one of us, researchers and science communicators, is to be very mindful and critical of your own communication and realizing or knowing very well for yourself, you know, when and what your message is, and what part of it is evidence and what is recommendation and what is maybe opinion. I mean, there's a very different narrative, and just to give someone else an example, in saying, look, I always went skiing there and then there was no snow. This is a personal story and it's valuable to tell, but it's very clear that it's a personal story. and saying there are 10 words that really sum up the evidence, you know, it's real, it's us. And so all these messages exist. And I think we should also, so I'm pro research advocacy. I just am wary of the people who say, yeah, but we're scientists, we should, I mean, to take the example of Neil Hens, because I also mentioned him, I mean, he was quoted in a newspaper saying, look, it's my expertise to say what happens if you do A, then, you know, there will be more transmission, 10 times more, 5 times more. If you do B, maybe less, 2 times more, 5 times more. But should you do scenario A or B, it's not my decision to make. We have politicians for this, right? That doesn't take away that he can have an opinion, and then he can decide that he, as an expert, can share his opinion or not, right? And he decides not to, which is totally respectful, totally, respectable. I respect it. Then you have other, just to name one from the same sort of group, Mark van Ranst, who doesn't shy away from sharing now also his opinion on Gaza and Israel, which I think, he is a citizen, he's entitled to that opinion, and he should do so, right? There it's very clear, Gaza and Israel, or the conflict between Israel and Hamas, there's no, the relationship with COVID is quite clearly distinct, right? But in a lot of ways, there is overlap, right? So I think we should just ourselves be mindful of what we say, how we say it, and what evidence we have for all the things we say. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, can I totally, to me, absolutely. Can I just add just a few more words on that? Just to answer your question, Annelies, I do think, well, I don't believe that scientists can be totally objective simply by choosing to work and dedicate their career on a specific domain. It already shows some sort of commitment in some direction. And other than that, I don't think they should actually behave as completely objective within their field. I think there was an example a few years ago. I think Luc Sels, rector of the KU Leuven, he even supported in an op-ed in a newspaper his researchers to step out of their ivory tower and be really within the field and have an opinion about topics that relate to their research, and where somehow they are opinion leaders, or at least in a domain in which they have a lot of technical background. So I think they are indeed at that moment entitled to say something about it, but it should be clear, of course, that this is a very personal opinion. Although from the outsider perspective, it is not always perceived as such. The scientist, especially if he's a well-known person, he or she, will still be associated with his public function as a well-known researcher, even though his or her opinion that he or she expresses at that time is extremely personal. One thing that taps into our domain is a discussion that we have internally sometimes between being a climate scientist versus being a climate activist, because we are often solicited to take part in climate marches, etc. But it is our belief, it is not based on scientific insights, but it's our belief that the credibility that you have as a scientist or as a researcher, that you may lose it when you step up as an activist. So that it's balancing out, actually. And also, so all the credibility that you have and that you have gained as a researcher, maybe you should use it in your way, because that's quite exclusive, and it has a specific added value that you should benefit from, rather than losing it or sacrificing it by stepping up as an activist.
Yeah.
Personal.
No, I think that's a correct correct choice to make. Especially, a march is that's a very sort of on the activist side, let's say. And I think again that also connects again to what I was saying with the team up. You don't want to become this person who is able, but that's the that's the Greta Thunberg of Flanders or whatever, and then you haven't even said one word. And people already think they know what you are going to say, also because you are put in this box. Maybe it's unavoidable to a certain extent, but you have to that's what I was trying to say with this, be aware of your positionality, and also, I mean, like Matthias says, be mindful of it and guard it a bit yourself. I think there's no right or wrong choice to make, in the sense that, I mean, some individual scientists might think, no, actually, I owe it to myself to be there in the climate march, but know that this has consequences for how you are perceived, right? And I think just, make this decision consciously and for the right reasons. And as an organization, you can choose to not do that and to leverage your expertise in a different way, in a way that you have more impact. But the choice will probably depend on your organizational personal goals, and the subject matter might differ a bit. I don't know. So I don't think necessarily going all the way to advocacy is the wrong decision. Just, it has consequences.
Okay, I think with this we can maybe wrap up our very interesting talk of today. I mean, I myself found it very interesting, nice opinions, nice insights. I'm still sharing the link to the website of the Belgian Climate Centre and to the SciComm meeting. If you're interested in knowing more about our next upcoming lunch talk, our spring program, you can always scan the QR code here in my window, or you can find us on our websites. And I thank you all for being here, especially thanks Liesbeth and Matthias for spending the time with us. And I hope to see you on the 1st of December or the 3rd of December on the meeting or on the march, whatever you prefer. And see you all the next time. Bye-bye.